Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks. It is now my honor to introduce our first keynote speaker of today's conference, Dr. Charles Usher Small. Welcome. Dr. Small is the founding director and president of the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, also called ISGAP, the first international interdisciplinary center devoted to the study of contemporary anti-Semitism, headquartered in New York City. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Oxford and has taught and held research posts at leading institutions including Oxford, Tel Aviv University, and Cambridge. Today, he also directs the ISGAP Wolf Institute Fellowship Program in Critical Contemporary Anti-Semitism Studies and is a research fellow at the St. Edmund's College, University of Cambridge. Dr. Small is the author and editor of major works on anti-Semitism and is widely recognized for bringing rigorous scholarship on campus anti-Semitism into the policy arena worldwide. Dr. Small has prepared a speech with the title, "The War Against Higher Education and the Jewish People, the Normalization of Anti-Semitism from the Classroom to the Streets of Europe." Dr. Small, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Madam Ambassador and President of the Belgian Friends of Israel and the Simon Wiesenthal Center, thank you for the invitation. You can hear me? It's good. This is not the first time I've spoken at the European Union. And the first few times that I've been here, I thought, like, wow, what an honor. I must have made it. I get to speak in the European Parliament. And I come here today with mixed feelings. I don't even know if I should be here. I don't even know if this institution deserves my presence. And I don't say this in an arrogant manner. We're living in a time of normalized Jew hatred. In fact, in this society, in this continent, it's morally required to hate Jews. You want to get a degree at a university, you want to get a good position in a proper media outlet, at a good university, it's morally required to demonstrate your hate for the existence of the self-determination of the Jewish people. If you express the morally required paradigms, you can go ahead and be successful. You may even be able to convert if you're born Jewish and enter into the paradigm of what is morally required. Today, there's two events this week that we commemorate. Remembrance Day, we called that in Canada growing up. Commemorating the incredible sacrifice that Europeans and Canadians and Australians and Americans and others made to stop the advancement of Nazism. I'm wearing a little poppy. There's not many of us who wear them anymore. We forgot. You know, I tell people that I'm Jewish because my mother is Jewish. Maybe setting aside metaphysical reasons, I didn't have much of a choice. But in every generation, ladies and gentlemen, we have a choice to defend liberal democratic principles, the notion that despite any of our differences, our so-called race, ethnicity, religion, our income, that in a democratic society we have the right to be equal under one legal system. And this, in my view, is worth struggling for and defending and perhaps even thinking of expanding it and defending it. And ladies and gentlemen, we have sold ourselves. We've sold ourselves to the highest bidder, no matter what the values that they impose upon us. And I'll explain to you what I mean. This is also a week in which a neo-Nazi, or not a neo-Nazi actually, a Nazi, a war criminal, who happened to be a president of a European country, who happened to be the Secretary General of the United Nations, was instrumental in passing a resolution that Zionism is racism. Mr. Waldheim celebrated at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel the day the resolution was passed, and he invited the people that were instrumental and representative of countries that went along with this demonization of the Jewish people in the United Nations. It was repealed in 1991, but the legacy that Jewish people are somehow inherently racist was accepted and normalized. And we deal with this in the contemporary context. We have to remember in this continent the finest minds in Germany and throughout Europe in the 1800s and the early 1900s defined the Jewish people as not white. And of course, the great philosophers of the time, the Enlightenment thinkers, argued that race was somehow inherent into who we were. The very essence of who we were was racialized. And one could not escape that definition because it was innate within us. You can change your religion, you can change your language, you can master classical music and the high culture of the day, but your race was fixed. The greatest minds came to that conclusion. And of course, they created a hierarchy. White people were at the top, black African people at the bottom, and this justified all sorts of colonial excursions throughout the world. And the Jew was defined not only as not white, but dangerous because we were poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race or nation, this fictitious, dangerous notion. And this belief was rooted in the pseudoscience of the day, in biology, in eugenics, in theology, in the social sciences, in the philosophy, and it started in the universities, ladies and gentlemen, at the best universities. And it filtered down into society to the point where this sick, twisted immorality justified moving Jews out of society, out of their homes, out of their communities, into the final solution. And as Professor Elie Wiesel always taught, that the Holocaust did not begin with the crematoriums and the railroad tracks. It began with these twisted ideas, these twisted words. And it resulted in the systematic, extended extermination of the Jewish people. And when I come into these halls, I remember my ancestors. I feel my ancestors here. Now, 2025, the great intellectuals of our time. I call them clowns, but they're intellectuals. They occupy professorships in Oxbridge and the Sorbonne and here in Belgium and in the Ivy Leagues and throughout the Western world. And the great intellectuals today say that the Jews are white. Wow. After the systematic extermination of my people, they've come to the realization that we are white. Hallelujah. But the sick, twisted Jew haters who now teach your children and your grandchildren are saying that the Jews are white but not welcome to the club, and so we're so terribly sorry for what we did or what our parents did or our grandparents did. Now the Jews are the white people, and we've, in less than 2 generations, the intellectual giants have now defined us as white supremacists, racists, apartheid supporters, colonialists, and occupiers. And ladies and gentlemen, if the Jewish people are racist, colonial, occupying, apartheid supporters, well, you are morally required to deal with them. You are morally required from a human rights perspective to dismantle the entity. And this is being disseminated at the best universities. And I'll never forget, about 10 days after October the 7th, I went to a teach-in at Columbia University. And some of the greatest professors in the Western world, Columbia, after all, is a great university, ranked among, I guess, the top 10 in the world. And the professors and their PhD students who are being inculcated into this twisted world of ideas, and I put it in quotations, professors of gender studies, social theory, literary criticism, philosophy, gender studies, and their students were saying that the occupation needs to end by all means necessary. And these are the masters of literature, using philosophy and post-colonial studies and gender studies. These are master intellectuals. And that the occupation has to end by all means necessary, and the murder, the rape, the mutilation of the occupiers who were met with the Hamas barbarians, that this violence will only end when all of the occupation ends and the settlers are removed by all means necessary. So they were calling, in a very sophisticated intellectual way, kind of like the professors of eugenics and biology and theology of the 1800s and the early 20th century. They had this paradigm that called for the dismantling of the state of Israel and the Jewish self-determination in our land, in our indigenous land. And they went on to say, which was remarkable, that anybody who aids and abets the occupation, anybody who resists the occupation in any manner, needs to be resisted by all means necessary. In other words, they were calling for violence, if not murder, against Jewish faculty members, students, and staff at Columbia University. The Jews of New York, the Jews of America, the Jews of Europe. And this is what this poison is coming out of now in its second generation in the universities, the best universities of Europe and the Western world. In 1983, Edward Said said that he was the last remaining Jewish intellectual, and that Jewish professors in America have become fat scribes in the suburbs, and that the Palestinians were the Jews and the Israelis and the Jews were the Nazis. When he said this in 1983, people thought he had a bad day and maybe he was disconnected from reality. But ladies and gentlemen, this is the discourse of Europe. This is the discourse in the universities for 2 generations and in the Americas. This is where the best journalists have learned their craft, the best professors have been inculcated. The best politicians, ladies and gentlemen, have been inculcated. Mr. Mamdani, he's not a communist. We need to know the minds of our enemy. He was a leader of SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, that comes out of AMP. AMP is the American Muslims for Palestine, a Muslim Brotherhood entity. And yet, when we're struggling against anti-Semitism in Europe, we don't want to engage this. But the Muslim Brotherhood, ladies and gentlemen, it sounds like a benevolent, nice organization. It's a good title, good branding. Maybe the social media gurus could, ramp it up. But the Muslim Brotherhood started 100 years ago in Egypt, and it takes, in my view, a perversion of the great religion of Islam and fuses it with European anti-Semitism, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the words and ideas that led to the extermination of the Jewish people in Europe. They take European anti-Semitism, influenced by Nazism, and fuses it with this perversion of Islam. And we in the West, for 2 pieces of silver, acknowledge that this is the authentic representation of the great religion of Islam. The Muslim Brotherhood has a bayah. In Islam, a bayah, in Hebrew, a bayah, as we know, it's a problem. Maybe it's a good word, but in Islam, it's a spiritual oath. The royal family of Qatar has a spiritual oath to the Muslim Brotherhood. They follow all the religious edicts, rulings, and fatwas of the Brotherhood. Qatar is playing with $1 trillion in assets, and this comes out of serious research from ISGAP. $1 trillion using for soft power. The spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood for many years, he's passed, Yosef Kawadawi, preached his entire life that the true believer is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. The true believer, the true Muslim, is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. This is the character who was instrumental in creating Islamic studies at Oxford University, my alma mater, brought in by Livingston and Corbyn and Galloway and the royal family. This is Oxford. We estimate that over $100 billion in undocumented money has gone into the United States from the Muslim Brotherhood over the last 20 years. $1 billion. $10 billion to Cornell. $1.3 billion, for example, to Texas A&M, and we found at Texas A&M 504 research projects. That was the IP address, the intellectual property rights were given to the Qatari regime. We flagged 58 projects that have dual-use military implications and 13 nuclear research military implications. Less than 2 weeks after our second report, Texas A&M decided to close their campus in Qatar, and we've been calling on the American government, on the Department of Energy, to investigate what's going on. $1 billion that we've discovered at Georgetown University, in the heart of the Washington, D.C. landscape. $1 billion. They have the most important diplomatic training program in the United States, if not the world. Now, the second generation of intellectuals spreading this red-green alliance. We have graduates in Europe and North America coming out of the best university, supporting and praising and walking in the streets, supporting Hamas. Hamas is not only genocidal in its anti-Semitism, also headquartered in Qatar, but they believe in the subjugation of women, the murdering of gay people, and the destruction of democracy. And yet, our political leaders, our university leaders, our religious leaders take money and do the dance with the Qataris. And is it any wonder when we do this that now moving into the second generation, the people coming out of the university support Hamas, support sophisticated second generation supporters of Hamas, who are now the mayor of New York City, once the great Jewish city, in which now, sitting around Shabbat tables in New York, Jews, Jewish Americans, Jewish people living in New York are asking the question, where do we go? Should we stay or should we go? But as Elie Wiesel always taught us, anti-Semitism may begin with the Jewish people, but it never ends with the Jewish people. And this unleashing of Jew hatred, which is now normalized and morally required again, because it runs deep in European society. It will not end with the Jews. Europe is going to be ripped apart because of the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood, the abandonment of democratic principles and of human rights, and there's going to be a nationalist movement that will not be controllable. But for decades, when we come to these institutions, when the Jewish people come to these institutions and we say, we have a problem, we've been warning European society and North America, and to no avail. But now it's deep in the heart of your cities and your culture and your institutions, And you have a significant problem. I'll end with a positive note because I've been quite severe, as I feel I must be. On a positive note, there's regimes in the Middle East that understand the danger of the Muslim Brotherhood, the danger of Qatar, the danger of Iran and other reactionary social movements that pervert Islam. And they are banning and fighting and containing this reactionary social movement of hate with a cult of death. But tragically, their leaders and their populations are here now. 40,000 in the UK on the watch list. So, on a positive note, I'll just say, my parents go to synagogue in Florida. There's 4 security guards with submachine guns, and they check the list to see if everybody has the right to enter in the United States of America. Recently, I was in Dubai, and I went for Shabbat to the rabbi's house, and I was late as usual. And it was Shabbat by the time I got to the house. I was knocking on the gate with a wall to enter the courtyard. It was Shabbat, so I couldn't ring the bell. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to open the door and enter the courtyard. The door was unlocked. I walked up to the building, which is a synagogue, and also the home of the rabbi. I was knocking on the door, nobody answered. After a while, I worked up the courage to open the door. It was not locked. I walked in. To my right, there was a minyan. People were praying for Shabbat as Shabbat was entering in. And to the left of this structure is his home. And the Shabbat table in his home was to the left. No security, no doors locked. So it can be done. We can confront this fascism of today, but we need to be resolved and to struggle and to understand that this is not just a Jewish problem, but this is a problem at the heart of democracy. Thank you.